Hi, so in this video, continuing to look at how to write idiomatic Python or Pythonic code. In the last video, we talked about iterating over iterables and sequence types. And here I want to talk about iterating over dictionaries. So the tip is actually similar in nature to that video because just like with sequences, we typically don't use indexing to iterate over the elements of a sequence. Now, there may be cases, of course, where we want to, but that's rarely needed. And so it is with dictionaries. When iterating over the elements of a Python dictionary, we also have several Pythonic techniques. So let's start with an example. Let's say that we have this string characters, let's say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dictionary that's going to contain each character of this character's string as the key, and then the ordinal, the code point essentially of the character as the value in the dictionary. So I'm going to create a dictionary by passing it a sequence of tuples consisting of key value, right? That's one way of creating a dictionary. So I'm going to use the zip function to create this iterable of tuples, and I'm going to create the tuples by essentially zipping the characters, and then I'm going to use this expression over here, odd of ch. So I'm using a generated expression for ch in characters. So basically, I am zipping together the characters and the odd function return of each character in there, and that should be ch. So if we take a look at this, we just have this dictionary here with the code points. So iterating over a dictionary is very simple. We can just say for, let's say item, or I'm going to use k, you'll see why in a sec. In D, I'm going to print k. And so by default, when we iterate over a dictionary, we are actually iterating over the keys of the dictionary. Which means that we can very easily, for example, generate a list of all the keys in the dictionary by just passing it to the list. So if we do this, we just get all the keys of the dictionary in a list. But how do we access the values? How do we iterate over the values in the dictionary? And very often I see people approach it this way. They're going to say for key in D. After all, that's how we iterate dictionaries, right? We iterate the keys of the dictionary. And then we're going to basically access the elements by looking up the value for that particular key. And so we get this. Now, if we want just a list of all the values, we could do this as well, basically by using the lookup. We could say dk for k in D. All right. So basically, this is accessing the values of the dictionary by using key lookups. And I see that being used quite a bit. But instead, the more Pythonic way of accessing the values and iterating over the values of a dictionary is to use the values view of the dictionary. Dictionaries have different views. They have three main views, at least at this point in Python. We have the keys view, which we kind of rarely use because we already iterate over the keys by default. But then we have a view for just the values in the dictionary, and we have a view for the items that combines the key and the value as a tuple in the dictionary. So let's start with the values view first. And basically, we can just call this values method on that dictionary instance. Now, what we get back is a dict values. It's actually a view object. It's not actually a list, but it's very simple. It is an iterable. So we can iterate over it. In particular, we could pass it to a list, for example, and create a list out of it. So we can do that. Or we can just say for v in d.values, and then we can just basically use that value. And you'll notice that we are no longer doing these key lookups. So that's the more Pythonic approach. Either do this, k for k in D, print dk, right? That was the first approach. And then the second approach is this one over here, which is using the dictionary view. And we don't kind of muck up our code by using a lookup in here. Now, sometimes we need to iterate over both the key and the value at the same time. And again, there's this temptation to basically say, well, now I need to get the keys, so I need to iterate the keys. So I'll say for k and d, and then let's say I need to access both the key and the value. Maybe I'm using it in a string, and I'm going to say here k equals, and then I need the corresponding value, so I'm going to do a lookup based on k. So we can do something like this. So that might be the temptation. But again, the more Pythonic way is to use the dictionary view. And we have a dictionary view called items. So let's take a look at it for item in d.items. So now we call the items method to get an items view. And then we're just going to print the item for now. And you can see that we basically get tuples. And those are tuples. We can just say type of item, or if you want a nicer clean name, you can use the class name. But as you can see, we have tuples, and then we have the key as the first element of the tuple and the value as the second element of the tuple, which means that if we want to iterate over both the keys and the values of a dictionary at the same time, we use the items view, and to make things even simpler, we can unpack the tuple directly in our for loop. So we can say for k comma v in d items, like so. And so now we have both the key and the value. And let me take this that I had over here, and I'm just going to modify it because now I don't need to do the lookup anymore. That's coming back directly from the view. So this is the more Pythonic way of iterating over both the keys and the values of dictionaries. Now let's take a look at a slightly more practical example. Suppose we've got a list of widgets for sale on our website, and those widgets have a few attributes. Maybe they've got a unique internal identifier. Maybe it's a UUID, and that's how we store them maybe in our database, right? Then we have a widget name, which may not be unique because maybe over time we create the same widget, right? So it's going to have the same name, but it's a different, variation that's been manufactured later. Whatever the case is, we have a widget name which may not be unique. And then we have a barcode, let's say, that's associated with each widget, and that, of course, has to be unique as well. So suppose we've got a dictionary that contains this data, and it's keyed by the unique internal identifier. So what I mean is that we have a dictionary in our code, as our code is running, that contains keys that are the unique identifier, and then the values are going to be tuples containing the name and the barcode. So let's actually create this data set. So from random, I'm going to import randint, and then we'll also need to seed the data. I like to seed so I have repeatable results. I'm also going to use the faker library. And so from that, we're going to import faker. I have a video on the faker library if you're interested. It's in this channel. So I'm going to seed so that my random generator has, repeatable results. And actually, I also need to seed faker. It doesn't seem to use the same seed. So I need to seed that as well. Then I'm going to make an instance of the faker object. And then we're going to go ahead and create our widgets. So we're going to say widgets equals, and then here what I want is I want to end up with a string, right? That's going to be the UUID. So I want repeatable UUID, so I'm not going to use the UUID4 from the UUID module, because even setting the seed, that is not going to give me repeatable UUIDs. But the faker library, however, does have a UUID as well. And so since I'm setting the seed for faker, the sequence of UUIDs that fake is going to generate is going to remain the same, right? Because I reset my seed. So again, it's just useful when you're testing stuff to have repeatable results. So I'm going to tell it that I want to cast the UUID4 to a string. I could just put a string around it, but that is one of the arguments that it has. So that's the key for my dictionary. And then I want a tuple that's going to contain the barcode. So again, I'm going to use the faker library. It has one called EAN13. There's a bunch of others as well. But essentially, that's a barcode. And then here, I'm going to create the widget name. So I don't want to have to deal with names and things like that. So I'm just going to give the widgets widget 1, 2, 3, or whatever. So I'm going to use a random integer between 1 and, let's say we're going to create 6. So I want some repeatable stuff. So I'm going to create a widget that's going to be, widget 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have to, of course, repeat this because, okay, so that's the value, right? And I want this a certain number of times. I don't care about the loop variable, but let's say I want to create 6 widgets, like so. So if we look at our widgets now, you can see that we have what I was talking about. We have the UUID as the key, we have the barcode, and we have the widget name, somewhere between 1 and 5, right? We had randint 1, 5. And that's inclusive, by the way, of the 5. Okay, so with this dictionary, of course, our code can quickly look up a widget by its UUID, right? But it can't look it up by the EAN13 code. So let's create a new dictionary that we're going to load up in memory, and it's going to basically have the EAN code, this code as the key, and then the other 2 values as the tuple. So how do we want to do it? Well, we could do it this way, but don't. I just want to show you the non-Pythonic way first, which is probably a way that many people initially would probably, do. So for UUID and widgets, so we create an empty dictionary, then we're going to loop through the widgets, and then we're going to say widget EAN lookup, and then we're going to say widgets. Well, what is it? What do we want as the key? Well, we want the widgets UUID, right? So we want to look up this widget, right? We've got the key. So now we're going to get the value, and I want the first element. So I need to do this, like so. And I'm going to set that key equal to a tuple of the UUID. I don't need to look that up. That's the key that I'm iterating, right? And then I need, however, to look up widgets again by UUID. And now I need to grab the second element, which is the name. Okay, so now we've got this horrendous looking code. And then if we say that, you can see that we've kind of switched around how things are. This now, over here, became the key. This became part of the value, and we retained the name over here as the value. Okay, so let's rewrite this so we aren't doing these key lookups, especially since we're doing that twice, right? We have to look up the widget value once here and again over here. Sure, you could create a temporary variable over here and then reference the temporary variable, but it's just getting more complicated. We don't need to do that. Instead, we can maybe do it this way. So let's start this way. So this is going to be an improvement, but we won't be quite done yet. So let's call it widgets, EAN, and then I'm going to iterate. Now I could iterate the value, right, in widgets.items. But what is the value? Well, the value is itself a tuple that contains the EIN, the barcode, and the name. So instead of just specifying my unpacking directly to UUID and a single value here, which would be a tuple, and then unpack it in here, I can just unpack it right away here, like so. So I'm going to unpack everything this way. So you'll notice I'm using the view, I'm using the unpacking that we can do in a for loop, and in fact, we can even unpack the tuple that comes back as the value in this case, and unpack it directly into 2 variables, like so. And now my code is very clean. I can say widgets EAN equals UUID common name, like so. And if we look at our widgets EAN, you can see that we have exactly what we had before, but much more Pythonic and much more expressive code. But we're not quite done yet. I've mentioned this many times in the past. So if you've looked at my videos before, I keep mentioning this, but if you have something of this nature where you create an empty container, an empty list, an empty dictionary, an empty set, and then you have a loop that loops over one iterable that basically then either appends or inserts values or adds values to that particular container object, you probably need to look at comprehensions and see, could I simplify this using a comprehension syntax, since comprehensions are considered more Pythonic. And indeed, in this case, we can. We can go ahead and write widgets EAN equal to, so I want a dictionary comprehension. And what do I want? Well, I want to loop this way, right? This is what I want to loop. So this will be my loop for the comprehension. And what do I want to put into my dictionary? Well, I want this to be the key. So I want the barcode to be the key. And then I want the UUID and name to be the value, like so. And so we, what did I do here? Sorry, I need to put the parentheses here. We don't require parentheses to generate tuples. Remember that the comma is what actually defines a tuple. But in this case here, we have to just to delimit basically what's going on in this comprehension. Okay, so now that we've fixed that problem, and we can see we get exactly the same thing as before. And so just to recap, we went from this right over here to this over here, like so. These were the two approaches, the non-Pythonic way and the more Pythonic way. Yes, there's the same number of lines of code, right? There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So one more line of code because I'm spacing things out. I could actually write all this on one line. I don't find it necessarily, very readable. I prefer breaking out comprehensions over multiple lines. So I like formatting it this way instead. But you can see it's much more readable. Okay, so I'm creating a dictionary. This is what my key is. This is what the value is, and this is where these things are coming from. I'm looping through the items and unpacking everything. It's much more expressive than trying to figure out if this was the first time you ran across this code. You'd have to think a little bit, right? You'd have to say, okay, what's going on? Okay, he's looking up, the widgets by UUID. Okay, so it's the key. So we're looking at the value, grabbing the. You understand what I'm saying, right? Pain in the ass to do this. Okay, so that's about it really for using the items and values views on dictionaries. But I do want to look at one more problem, and it's really, nothing to do with views in particular, but we looked at how to switch around those two things, right? And this was okay because we knew that the barcode was going to be unique and we knew that the UUID was unique. But what if I wanted to look up the data based on the widget name? And now you'll notice that I have repetitions in the widget name, right? I manufactured this widget for different ways over time, and so they ended up with different UUIDs and different barcodes. And I want to create a quick and easy way of looking up by a name all the different barcodes and UUIDs. Now I can't use a dictionary for that because we'd have, at least we can't use the same technique that we did here because we can't repeat the widget, right, for key multiple times. It can only occur once in the dictionary. So instead, I want the dictionary to have the key widget for, and now I want it to have a list that contains the tuples of the UUIDs and the barcodes. And if there's more than one, then we'll just keep adding to that list. So what we need is the ability to store each widget name only once and set the value to be a sequence of possible values. So one way of doing this might be to use Python's default dict. So we're going to import default dict from collections. And let's start this way. So I'm going to create a widgets name dictionary, but it's going to be a default dict. And I'm going to make the default factory a list. So basically it's going to be a list. I don't know actually if I have a video on the default dict or not in this channel. If I haven't, go look at the Python documentation and see how it works. But it's a very useful thing to work with. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and you'll see how it works right now. So I'm going to say for UUID, comma, EAN, comma name. So just like before, in widgets, so I'm going back to my original list, right, which had the UUID as the key, and then the value was the tuple EAN and name. So I'm unpacking everything this way. And then what I'm going to do is to refer to the key or to the entry with a key name in the widgets name dictionary. Now, the first time I encounter a name, this thing doesn't exist. This name doesn't exist in widget's name. So the default dict is going to automatically create an entry for us under that key and assign it an instance of, well, whatever comes back from calling this callable here. So in our case, it's going to essentially create an empty list. So this means that I don't have to check if the key is in the dictionary or not. I can just access it this way, and I can say append. And then I want to append what? I want to append, and again, I've got to use these brackets here, these parentheses, to indicate that I'm appending a tuple. So I need to delimit it this way. So if we have this, we can look at widget's name like so. Sorry, let me fix that. And you can see now for widget 4, we now have multiple entries for that widget because it had multiple entries essentially in the original widget's dictionary. And of course, this is one of the situations where even though we have this pattern of creating an empty collection here and then looping through some other iterable and then modifying that empty collection, we cannot rewrite this into a comprehension. This is a default dict and it's just not going to work. All right, so this is a case where this is perfectly legitimate to do it this way. All right, thank you for watching.